Hello, we are announcing a brand new giveaway for 75,000 subscribers. All you have to do is obviously follow me. We are giving away one lightsaber from Art Sabers. They are sponsoring this giveaway, so what you have to do is go to the pinned comment down below, follow Art Sabers on Instagram, like their image, and tag 2 of your friends, and you will be entered into our giveaway. We will be doing this giveaway until we hit 75,000 subscribers here on PPSW. Thank you again for your continuous support. Our story begins in 3967 BBY, when a disturbance changed the balance of the Force. Anakin Skywalker was born in an Outer Rim territory world shortly before the beginning of the Mandalorian Wars. The Jedi had been avoiding war with Mandalore, and the Republic itself was nearly engaged with the Mandalorian enemy. In 3964 BBY, there was a young 30-year-old Jedi by the name of Revan, who also went by the name the Revanchist. He was well respected by the Galactic Republic and by the Jedi as well. His friend Alec and him were beginning a new movement within the Jedi Order. Revan believed that the Jedi should participate in the Mandalorian Civil War and aid the forces of the Galactic Republic, Revan having gained the nickname by the Republic media as the Jedi's own crusader. Being that Revan was openly vocal about his opinion, he began to rally together Jedi in his cause to fight against the Mandalorians and assist the Republic in this war with Mandalore. Revan tried to persuade the Jedi High Council to allow him and his followers to fight against the Mandalorians on behalf of the Jedi Order, but the Jedi Council didn't allow it. They believed that the Jedi shouldn't be involved in a political war. The Jedi didn't serve the Senate, they served the people of the galaxy, and they couldn't logistically be involved in a war against the Republic or the Mandalorians. Their belief was grounded, and it wouldn't change. But Revan was a rebel. He wasn't going to simply allow the Council to tell him and his followers that they couldn't do what they wanted to do. Sure, it wasn't the Jedi way, but Revan wasn't exactly very Jedi-like himself. He was trained by a number of different Jedi Masters, and there he was, a Jedi Knight, leading a small coalition of Jedi followers to break past the will of the Jedi Council. Revanchists arrived outside of Taurus, inside the Adjustor sector. Revan was bringing down his followers here before they went out to scout out the Mandalorian positions in an effort to aid the Republic. While on Taurus, Revan met up with Jedi Master Lucian Dre in an effort to recruit more Jedi to his cause. There was a Jedi Tower on Taurus, but there were no other Jedi willing to join him. It's not even that Master Dre was obeying the will of the Council. He and his fellow Jedi just simply had no interest in aiding the Galactic Republic, and so they declined. Though there was one thing that Master Dre had for Revan. A child had been born on the planet Taurus a few years beforehand. This child had the highest midichlorian count ever collected since the Jedi ever interacted with the Ones. Master Dre believed this child could be the one to bring balance to the Force. He also knew that Revan was essentially the pride of the Jedi Order. He had what seemed to be limitless potential, and Master Dre believed that this child would be better fit with Revan than here at the Jedi Tower on Taurus. While it was a Jedi Academy, it was also more like a satellite campus, and it was a bit too close to this Mandalorian war going on in the galaxy. The Jedi were slowly moving younglings off-planet in fear of a confrontation with the Mandalorians or even the Republic. It was a slow effort, and it wasn't exactly going anywhere, and Master Dre believed that Revan, being so influential, would likely be back at Coruscant before any of these other younglings could be removed from the tower. Revan was a bit neglectful of this idea, but he gave in. The only reason being that if he was going to be away from Coruscant, he could possibly help train the future of the Jedi Order. There was something unnerving about all of it for Revan. At this point in his life, he had no intention of being a Jedi Master. But if it was the Chosen One, then the Chosen One should be with him and his followers, rather than the Jedi Council on Coruscant, being that they themselves were neglectful of this conflict. Revan, if wise enough, could guide the child into being more than just the Chosen One, but the sole bringer of peace and harmony in the galaxy. Revan took the child, wrapped in garments, into his hands, and walked back into the vessel he and his followers arrived in. Not long after the Revanchists left Taurus, they were attacked by the First Watch Circle of the Jedi Covenant, which killed all their students in the Padawan massacre of Taurus. One of them survived and escaped, but Revan wouldn't learn about this for a long while. It wouldn't be long after the Padawan massacre that Cassius Fett invaded the planet and took the tower for his own. Regardless, Revan took his followers to the planet of Surja, while he himself, along with the child Anakin Skywalker, which was situated in a Jedi pod, investigated Mandalorian activity on Onderon and its moon of Duxon. This was the first reconnaissance mission for the two of them, but it built up a bond between Revan and the child. Because these missions to Onderon's system were nothing but recon, it gave Revan time to simply just talk to Skywalker. Revan knew that the Force worked in mysterious ways. He himself had memories of when he was a child, and he knew that whatever he said could likely stick to the mind of Anakin, being that he was so powerful with the Force after all. So, the early lessons involved Revan just ranting about how the Force worked and how it operated. The Force was simply incredible, because it didn't bend to the will of either party, not the light nor the dark. Anakin's presence in the Force would only encourage the darkness to rise in an attempt to beat him. During their first mission, they would see very little traces of any Mandalorians, though he did learn that his friends and followers had all been captured on the planet of Surja, which meant he needed help. When Revan and Skywalker returned to Coruscant, Revan would keep Anakin a secret, while at the same time revealing his findings from Onderon and Dexon. He would also disclose that the Revan chips were captured on Surja after an ambush made by the Mandalorians. This wouldn't give Revan any result that he wanted, especially after the Order reaffirmed their feelings about the Jedi Order staying out of the Mandalorian War with the Galactic Republic. Revan brought back Anakin inside of his vessel and departed for Surja alone. He was genuinely upset, ranting to himself, and therefore by inclusion, Anakin. Revan stopped when he noticed a child and remembered that he had the Chosen One with him. Revan told Anakin that the Jedi weren't always right. They did make mistakes, and this was one of them. While yes, Revan did disobey orders, and his followers suffered because of it, their inability to act left thousands and maybe millions in the wake of destruction. Revan spoke to Anakin and said it slowly and clearly, that the will of the Council was not always the will of the Force. They would save Alec and the other Jedi, and then from there they would go on to fight the Mandalorians who have already caused so much carnage in the galaxy. When Revan arrived, he would keep Anakin secured, and he would confront the Mandalorians, freeing his followers from the Mandalorian scientist Demagul. The Revanchists would begin a campaign galaxy-wide to encourage the Jedi to get involved in the war, and the Republic media would eat it up, referring to this as the Revanchist movement, the leader of this movement being referred to as the Revanchist. For a year, they would continue provoking the Jedi to make a move on the war, to join the Republic, and to fight back these Mandalorians. If they didn't, then more people would suffer. Currently, Revan and his followers were on the planet of Cathar, under the assumption that the disappearance of the entire planet species had a direct relationship to the barbaric, warlike nature of the Mandalorians. While they were on the planet, Revan felt a disturbance. This disturbance was alerted by Anakin. The child for the past year rarely made any noises or talked. He was a quiet kid, and Revan and his followers enjoyed his presence, but this was a ferocious scream. When Revan heard Anakin, his mind was taken away from Cathar, and immediately taken to pain. Mandalore the Ultimate, leader of the Mandalorian forces, led an attack on Surico. The Mandalorians bombarded the entire surface of the planet and killed thousands within minutes. The cries of terror and pain echoed through the Force, and it shook Revan and Skywalker to their core. This was the first real show of Force that Anakin had ever used. As a child, there was very little that he could actually do, and at this point, there was very little that the Jedi could do to intervene on Surico. For several months, Revan and his followers would bounce around the Outer Rim territories until they returned to Cathar and had a collective vision. Their Force vision depicted the massacre of the people of Cathar. The Mandalorians, under the leadership of Cassius Fett, executed the Cathar because they dishonored the Mandalorians during the Great Sith War. There was an individual Mandalorian depicted defending the Cathar, and he too was executed for trying to stand against Cassius Fett. Cassius saluted the efforts of the lone Mandalorian, and then everyone of the Cathar and the singular Mandalorian were executed. The Mandalorian who stood up to Cassius Fett had one piece of his helmet retrieved by Revan himself. Revan was inspired by the sacrifice of the Mandalorian, and so he made a vow to wear the mask until the Mandalorians paid for what they did. Revan would take the information back to the Council on Coruscant and inform them of what happened on Cathar and Surico. At this point, the Jedi Council could no longer neglect the atrocities committed by the Mandalorians. Genocide was against their code of ethics, and so they unwillingly steered the Jedi Order into war with the Mandalorians on the side of the Galactic Republic. And while the Jedi publicly denounced Revan and his followers, Revan was a very intelligent individual. Recalling a move made by civilians during the Great Sith War, Revan would propose to the Council that the Revanchists act as official Republic military enforcers, though they would be labeled as Mercy Corps, representatives of the Republic and of the Jedi. And so begrudgingly, the Jedi Council allowed the Mercy Corps to be left under the command of Revan. He would tell Anakin about all these events, and while Anakin was still just a child, this information could prove to be vital for the child at some point in his life. Revan carried on, and in the following weeks, the Revanchist Jedi would join the Republic military in operations against the Mandalorians. Revan was told by Malak, and even one of his most valuable lieutenants in Metra Surik, that they should place Skywalker inside the Jedi Temple on Coruscant to keep him safe. Though Revan was beyond confident in his abilities, his confidence would be duly received as he won a string of victories for the Republic for the next year. In 3962 BBY, Revan and Malak would prevent the Battle of Dura from becoming an absolute catastrophe. The two Jedi would use a fleet of interdictor-class cruisers to the planet to prevent Mandalorian starcraft from escaping with the spoils of war. Considering there were great shipyards above Duro, the Mandalorian raid was successful until Revan's strategy shattered their plans. Unsuspectingly, Revan would be rewarded by the Supreme Chancellor of the Galactic Republic, Intel Cressa, who named Revan the Supreme Commander of the Galactic Republic military, which granted Revan 1/3 of the entire military of the Republic. The Jedi Knight was genuinely surprised, but he took the gift in with open arms. Revan's genius strategy didn't go unnoticed by the Republic, and with Anakin Skywalker there by his side, there was little that could really stop him. While the Mandalorians had made a solidified push against the Republic, Revan slapped back, and the Republic, counter-assault, began to resist the warriors of Mandalore. Though the reason the Republic was able to win so much is because Revan knew the importance of the Republic industrial complex. Mandalore was a small grouping of planets and moons that resisted a galactic superpower. So, Revan used that to his advantage by sacrificing resources and territory to undermine their opponents. Revan and Malak referred to this as a moral shortcut, which inevitably became more warlike and less Jedi-like. With Anakin in a small Jedi pod following them around, these warlike tendencies would be plastered to the inside of his mind. The reason Revan and Malak became so cruel was because the Mandalorians didn't play nice, and to beat the Mandalorians, he had to be just as brutal and merciless as they proved to be. The continuous war effort would have Revan and Malak across the galaxy for 2 years, fighting the Mandalorians on every front. During that time, Revan, Malak, and Skywalker, who was 7 years old at this point, discovered an ancient Sith ruin near the Jedi Enclave on Dantooine. It was the ruins of the Rakata species, and they discovered a star map, which led to a space station called the Starforge. Anakin, being so young and asking questions about everything, such as why is the sky blue, wanted to know everything about this space station, but there was little knowledge to be shared. Another piece of the map would be discovered on Kashyyyk, in the depths of the Shadowlands, though this is when Revan began to take his young student on a path to the dark worlds of the Sith. Of course, Malak was with them when they visited Korriban and Malachor V. On Malachor, Revan discovered a learning academy of the Sith, and he introduced himself and Skywalker to the dark arts, and began to use them. Not long after Revan introduced Malak to the dark side of the Force. Revan and Anakin specifically would practice with the dark side. By this point, even at 7 years old, Anakin did have a Jedi weapon, though he didn't use it in active combat. He simply had it for practice with Revan. The bond between Revan and Anakin did sideline Malak a little bit, but Malak respected the bond between the two, and didn't do anything to get in the way of it. And while they were all using the dark side, rather actively, they did not renounce the ways of the Jedi Order. The Jedi would return to Taris to confront the Mandalorians who had taken over the planet, and when they were there, they were able to save a number of slaves that had been captured by the Mandalorians, slaves that were about to be sold on the galactic black market. And while their victories were many, there was one Mandalorian lieutenant that was able to beat the two Jedi, that being Cassius Fett, at the Jagga's cluster. Revan responded quickly by having his own lieutenant, Metra Surik, attack Onderon and Dexon, which were both housing Mandalorian strongholds at this point. This was difficult for Metra to do because her forces were weakened in comparison. The Battle of Dexon was a several-month siege that saw every 10 Republic troopers die for every 1 Mandalorian death. Because of this terrible loss, Revan decided to launch a campaign on Althir III to draw the Mandalorians out. While Metra was struggling on Dexon, he was building a massive super weapon called the Mass Shadow Generator, which was essentially the centerpiece of a trap that was in the Malachor system for the Mandalorians. Despite the loss of Dexon, Metra would be placed in command of half the fleet as a means to draw the Mandalorians to Malachor. Revan would leave Anakin out of this, believing that the battle with the Mandalorians would be their final stand against the Republic. On his way back, Revan was sidetracked by a Mandalorian scouting party that pushed him off course. When he dealt with them, he arrived over Malachor to see a massive fleet battle taking place, though Mandalore the Ultimate knew that defeat was inevitable for his people, so naturally, he challenged Revan to one-on-one combat on his flagship. Revan accepted this, and he fought the Mandalorian warrior. Mandalore the Ultimate was a prideful warrior, and he held his own, but against the likes of Revan he was no match. When he was cut down, he removed his helmet and informed Revan that he and the Mandalorians were manipulated by a red-skinned Sith into beginning this war with the Republic. The Sith convinced them to uncover a Sith tomb on the planet Rakid, and shortly after that, they engaged the Republic. Revan was given the coordinates before the warrior died. As a trophy, Revan took the mask from the Mandalorian warrior, and then he watched as the Mass Shadow Generator was activated. The Republic was going to win anyways, but when the gravity vortex opened up, it dragged vessels from both fleets down into the surface of the planet, crushing them all. There were thousands of losses, but the Mandalorians suffered the most of the casualties, and they transmitted their unconditional surrender to the Republic after their loss at Malachor. Revan would bring the 7-year-old Anakin Skywalker with him to Mandalore, where he would order them to give up their weapons and their armor, forcing many of them to become bounty hunters and mercenaries. At the same time, Anakin completed a project that Revan had been working on at the same time in his spare time. Revan was genuinely impressed that the child was able to complete it, but Skywalker was incredibly talented, and so Revan used HK-47 to target and assassinate opponents so that he wouldn't have to repeat the same mistakes at Malachor 5. While Revan and Malak were making the Mandalorians reap their actions, Metra Surik lost her connection to the Force, and so she answered to the Jedi Council for her actions. She tried to get Revan and Malak to answer for their crimes as well, but they didn't, claiming to be chasing down Mandalorians in the unknown regions. But that wasn't the truth. Revan took his forces to the unknown regions for another reason. He, Malak, and Anakin would descend to the planet Rakid to investigate what Mandalore the Ultimate had mentioned before his death over Malachor. The three discovered the tomb of Sith Lord Dramath II, and there was also a Datacron inside of its sarcophagus. Inside the Datacron was information of the planet named Nathema. Before leaving, Revan left Mandalore the Ultimate's mask inside of Dramath's sarcophagus to ensure that the Mandalorians would never find it. The three then moved quickly to Nathema inside the Trelorian sector. The entire planet was barren from the Force, but its secrets were limitless, such as the tale of Darth Vitiate the Immortal. They learned that he had been around since the time of the Great Hyperspace War, which happened thousands of years beforehand. Anakin was more enthralled with this information, more so than Revan or Malak. His interest led them to have to learn about the ritual of Nathema, which is why the entire planet was barren of life, though it did give Vitiate immortality. The Sith Emperor had gathered younger generations of Sith before him. Revan and Malak became obsessed with finding the Sith threat, and they followed a trail from the Sith survivors to the world of Dromund Kaas, where they would find the capital of the reconstructed Sith Empire. The three of them would pose as mercenaries to avoid giving up the fact that they were Jedi. The three of them spent a number of months undercover. It was one of Anakin's earliest tests, a very difficult one at that. They learned that the Sith Empire planned on returning and launched an attack against the forces of the light. The three Jedi didn't inform the Republic or the Jedi. They were confident. Revan had his young apprentice stay hidden until they returned with the Sith Lord's head in their hands. Malak and Revan departed, and Anakin waited in silence, listening to the sounds of heavy machinery bouncing around near him, and the sound of soldiers marching back and forth. It was all a bit daunting. Anakin closed his eyes and listened to the Force. When he did, he could hear Revan and Malak approaching the Emperor, until there was silence. Anakin heard two bodies drop to the floor. Anakin jolted up and ran towards the throne room, where he found Malak and Revan standing eerily quiet. Anakin slowed down, and before he could settle in and grab his Jedi weapon, he was thrown to his knees and sat down in front of the Sith Emperor. Vitiate dominated Anakin's mind in the same way he had the other two Jedi, twisting their minds and scouring their useful information, turning them into nothing but servants. Vitiate called them all three by name: Darth Revan, Darth Malak, and Darth Vader, telling the three of them to go back to the Republic as a vanguard to find the legendary Starforge. Once they won, they were to return back. Before they left, Vitiate showed his loyal servants, the three, and informed his people that these Sith had been Republic spies. Now, they had been executed in the depths of the Citadel. The three would depart, and by using the various star maps would arrive at the conclusion that the legendary weapon was inside the Lahan system. Though when they got there, they crash-landed on the planet and were captured by a Rakata tribe. The Sith were unable to understand the language of these primitive beings, though after stealing information from the tribal leader, the Sith would make an exchange, which would grant Revan, Malak, and young Vader access to the Star Forge. Revan was able to become allies with the Rakatan elders through this process. The only reason the elders permitted Revan access to the ancient weapon was because of his promise to destroy it once he got access to it, which was a lie, because the second the three of them got access, they turned the ancient weapon back on, and all of them, having broken free of the Emperor's control, interpreted his darkness as their own thoughts and their own desires. This, of course, was untrue, but the dark side was ruthless, and it convinced them of things they did not individually believe. Though, with this new weapon under their command, they would begin a new Sith Empire, and Malak would be Revan's apprentice, along that of Skywalker being his apprentice too. Vader was continuously tagging along, and he felt left out from time to time on these missions. He did feel a certain level of resentment for his master because of how hard it was to get his genuine attention. This continued as Revan studied the Starforge and realized that the weapon was more useful than just creating weapons. He took a fragment of the massive structure and left it on Nar Shaddaa, in care of a number of slaves, while using another fragment of the station to construct his own fleet. This is where tension arose between master and apprentice. Vader on the side had to watch Malak as he believed that his master was weak. The Sith Lord planned out a grand campaign against the Republic, one that would take 20 years to complete. But by the end of it, it would see the corruption uprooted and give him the ability to slide right into the cusp of power. Revan didn't want to hollow out the military structure or the government of the Republic, just the ones who wouldn't be loyal to him. While sure, Revan was focused on his grand plan, his youngest apprentice sat behind the scenes and listened to every little thing that Revan did and said. Maybe it was a bit neglectful teaching, but it was better than nothing. Revan, having spent so much time inside the Republic military, knew the ins and outs. With the information he acquired over the years, he prepared for an attack on Forest. The reason being is that the Republic had a number of warships stationed there. Revan, using his brilliant strategic skills, would barge into Forest, capturing the most of the Republic warships and destroying the rest. One of the Republic officers, who looked up to Revan and liked him quite a bit, switched teams and joined the Sith Empire, becoming the admiral and the commander of the entire Sith fleet in the process. The tension between Malak and Revan continued from there, as Malak ordered the admiral to bombard Telos IV, which he did because he was listening to orders. However, Revan had every intention to conquer that planet before it was blown up. Vader watched this bickering and then he felt the tension. He initially sided with Revan, but he slowly began to take the side of Malak, especially as Malak took favorability with Vader and Revan's growth as a Sith Lord. So, what Malak did, while Revan was preparing his 20-year campaign, is he began to train Lord Vader. This was all a part of the plan, at least that's what Malak told Vader. In Vader's mind, he was doing what Revan wanted, which was to train under Malak until Revan had time to train him, so he accepted the path laid before him. Skywalker, being so young, did have tremendous power in the Force, and because he was essentially with the most powerful Sith in the galaxy, he picked up on all their lessons very well. Revan began to focus on executing politicians who didn't fit in his realm, and so HK-47 delivered their heads in a timely manner. Though the tension between Master and Apprentice broke out on the bridge deck in front of young Vader. The young Sith watched as Malak and Revan fought each other, seemingly to the death. Malak believed that Revan was too soft to be a true Sith Lord, and attempted to kill him for power over the Sith Empire. During the duel, Revan avoided strikes by his student and subsequently removed the jaw of Malak. Revan didn't kill Malak and made an example out of him in front of Vader. Revan told his young student that to walk the way of the Sith required balance. It required precision. A lack of that led to the inevitable defeat that Malak had faced. Revan shoved Malak to the floor and told him to clean up his act. Malak had to get himself a prosthetic jaw and a vocabulator so that he could speak. He'd have to wear this for the rest of his life, being that Revan's damage was permanent. While Vader rejoiced in some interaction between himself and Revan, he was immediately disappointed when Revan turned his attention to building HK-50 series droids on Telos IV, due to the success of Anakin's work on HK-47. This disappointed Vader greatly, and he felt a true sense of resentment for his master, believing that Revan had truly betrayed him and left him out in the dirt. Vader would become closer to Malak, and it wouldn't attract Revan's interest because truthfully he didn't notice. For 3 more years, Malak and Vader's bond would tighten and Revan would continue his pursuit of victory until the Jedi led him into a trap. A strike team of Jedi attacked Revan's flagship and surrounded him. Revan and Malak, having separate starships, were separated. Inside of Revan's bridge, he fought off Jedi Warriors, killing several of them in the process until he was confronted by a Jedi Knight, Bastila Shan. Revan was an incredible duelist, but Bastila, having used battle meditation before this conflict, was ready to ice Revan and bring him back to the Jedi Temple. During their fight, Malak felt the tension in the Force. He stood on his bridge, and he put his hand on 10-year-old Vader's shoulder and pushed him to the front of the bridge. Malak told the crew to fire on Revan's cruiser. The crew obliged to Malak, as he turned towards Vader and told him that he would do everything that Revan couldn't. Malak would train Vader in the ways of the dark side and turn him into the ultimate threat in the galaxy. Revan's vessel exploded and the bridge shattered in front of Malak and Vader. Malak instantly assumed that he had killed his rival, and so he redirected the fleet away from him. But Malak wasn't done his quest yet. A former Jedi was thrown from his feet behind the 2 Sith. Malak looked over at Vader and told him that to prove his usefulness, he'd have to kill this Jedi. Vader looked at his master and then over back at the adult Jedi. This Jedi, if he killed Vader, would become Malak's new apprentice, being named Darth Bandon. Of course, if he failed, then Malak would continue to train Vader, but he wanted to test out this new apprentice. The originally foreseen chosen one was 10 years from birth, facing down a Jedi for the right to be heir to the Empire of the Sith. Vader ignited his weapon. Having been left in the dust by his former master on numerous occasions, this was his one chance right here to prove his worth to Lord Malak, so that he could be trained in the ways that he believed he should have been trained in. The issue for Vader was that he was always revered as his chosen one of the Jedi Order. However, he was consistently neglected. It felt like the only reason he and Revan ever bonded was because Revan was just ranting at him, and not even engaging in conversation. One of the deckhands threw a lightsaber down in front of the Jedi. This particular Jedi had a quest for power, though he was locked up for the time being because he hadn't fully committed to the dark arts. This was his one opportunity to fully commit to them. If he did, then the galaxy could be his. If he didn't, then he would just simply die. The Dark Jedi rose to his feet and ignited his lightsaber. Vader stepped forward, slowly moving into the only form he really knew. Thanks to Revan and Malak's loose training, he had to essentially train himself with the little information he had, though the neglect he faced fueled him. Vader's base form was a combination between 2 and 6, so he stepped forward. Bandon rushed the little child. He had no clue that Vader was meant to be the chosen one or to fulfill some prophecy of the Jedi. The Order was 22,000 years old at this point. Anything could be made up. Bandon swung down and Vader moved out of the way, becoming a hard-to-hit target based on his size alone. Bandon turned around and yelled, swinging his lightsaber back and throwing it forward, as Vader caught it with a parry and shoved forward. Vader may have been strong with the Force, but he was just a child. He had no chance at winning with physical dominance. The man grinned as the lightsabers screamed at each other, gliding across each other's surface. Bandon beat down on Vader, throwing him from his feet. Vader looked up and his face creased with anger. His eyes turned Sith yellow. Bandon didn't even take mind of this as he reached up and swung down. As he reached the ground where Vader was, the blade stopped. The lightsaber flipped out of his hand, and he was lifted into the air as Vader shot electricity out of his hands. It was pure power from the dark side of the Force, and in moments it fried Bandon, and he died within midair. Vader dropped him, grabbing his own lightsaber, which had yet been bled, as he ignited the weapon and whipped it around at the deckhand, who gave the former Jedi a lightsaber. The blade caught the deckhand in the head, and Vader used the Force to pull it back before turning it off and kneeling before his new master. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is part 1 of our story. This could be part 1 of 3 or 2. I'm not sure yet. I haven't started 2 or 3 yet, so I don't know yet. Again, special thanks to Benjamin Wells, Tiger Boy, Darth Revan, Pimp Daddy Bane, The Last Jedi, Apollo, Madman Stooges, Anakin 003, Lemon Knight, Flynn Van Cease, Lord Deadwing for supporting the channel. Smash the like button on this video, you know what to do. I'm excited to do this. This is like the first video that's like really fully in Legends, so it's very challenging for me, but it's fun, and I hope you all are enjoying it thus far. The only other thing is to say is go check out that giveaway. I do want to give away another lightsaber, and we're going to be giving away one for 75,000 subscribers. We're pushing for 100,000, but 75,000 is a milestone on the way. Thank you all. I love you all. Spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.